The story of the American Civil War did not begin on a battlefield. It began decades earlier, in quiet farmlands and growing cities, in heated debates, and in the hearts of people divided by belief, by economy, and by the very definition of freedom. The war that would come to define a nation was born long before the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter. In the early years of the 19th century, the United States was a nation of contradictions. On paper, it was the land of liberty and democracy, a young republic forged on the principles of equality and justice. But in practice, that promise was uneven. In the southern states, millions of African men, women, and children were enslaved, treated as property rather than people. Their labor powered the cotton fields, the sugar plantations, and the tobacco farms that made the South wealthy. In the North, the economy was transforming. Factories, railroads, and new industries were rising. Here, slavery had mostly been abolished, and the idea that one man could own another had grown intolerable to many. This divide, between the agrarian South and the industrial North, widened with every passing decade. Each side saw the other as a threat to its way of life. For Southerners, the Northern abolitionist movement seemed not only an attack on slavery, but on their culture, economy, and rights as states. For Northerners, the continued existence of slavery was a moral wound that mocked the nation's founding ideals. As America expanded westward, the question followed every new territory. Would it be free or slave? In 1820, the Missouri Compromise tried to quiet the storm. Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, Maine as a free one, and a line was drawn across the map. Slavery would be banned in territories north of that line. For a time, it worked. But it was only a bandage over a growing wound. The decades that followed saw the argument flare again and again. The Compromise of 1850 admitted California as a free state, but forced the North to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, requiring escaped slaves to be returned to their masters. The North resented it deeply. The South demanded it fiercely. Tension grew. Then came Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, a spark in dry grass. It allowed settlers in those territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri line. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed into Kansas, each trying to control the vote. The territory erupted in violence. Bleeding Kansas, they called it, a preview of the war to come. In this age of turmoil rose a new political voice, the Republican Party, founded on the principle that slavery should not spread into new territories. Among its ranks stood a tall, quiet man from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was not born into privilege. He grew up poor, worked by hand, educated himself by candlelight. Yet his mind was sharp, his words powerful. To him, the issue was clear. A nation built on liberty could not endure half slave and half free. A house divided against itself, he said, cannot stand. His words carried across the land, stirring both hope and anger. When he won the presidential election of 1860, the South saw it not as a political loss, but as a death sentence to their way of life. Before Lincoln could even take office, South Carolina seceded from the Union. One by one, 6 more states followed: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. In February 1861, they formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as president. Their reasoning was simple in their eyes. The federal government had violated their rights as sovereign states, and they would no longer remain part of it. But the heart of the issue was not just sovereignty. It was slavery. The Confederacy's own constitution protected it as an unchangeable right. The North saw secession as rebellion. The South saw it as freedom. Two visions of America now stood face to face. As Lincoln took the oath of office in March 1861, he faced a fractured nation. In his inaugural address, he spoke not as a conqueror, but as a healer. He pleaded for unity, promising not to interfere with slavery where it already existed, but he stood firm that the Union was perpetual. No state could simply leave. "We are not enemies," he said, "but friends. We must not be enemies." But the time for friendship had passed. In April 1861, the Confederate Army demanded the surrender of Fort Sumter, a federal fort in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The Union commander refused. For 34 hours, Confederate guns bombarded the fort. On April 12, 1861, the first shots of the American Civil War were fired. The Union troops eventually surrendered the fort, but the event electrified the nation. Across the North, men enlisted in droves to preserve the Union. Across the South, thousands rallied to defend their new Confederacy. Brother turned against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The lines were drawn, 23 states for the Union, 11 for the Confederacy. Both sides believed God was on their side. Both believed victory would be swift. Neither imagined the storm that was coming. The early months of war were marked by confusion and inexperience. In July 1861, both armies met near Manassas, Virginia, at a place called Bull Run. Civilians came to watch, expecting an easy Union victory and a quick end to rebellion. But the battle turned into chaos. Confederate forces, led by General Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson, stood their ground fiercely. The Union Army broke and fled, their retreat turning into a panic. The illusion of a short war died that day. Lincoln realized this would not be settled by one grand battle, but by a long, brutal struggle. He called for 500,000 more troops. The South, too, mobilized everything it had. While soldiers marched and fought, a deeper war was being waged. The war of ideals. What did the Union truly stand for? Was it merely to preserve the United States, or was it to destroy slavery once and for all? Lincoln wrestled with this question. At first, his goal was to save the Union, not to abolish slavery outright. But as the war dragged on, as blood stained the soil of Virginia and Tennessee, it became clear. The two could not be separated. A Union that allowed slavery would never truly be united. Meanwhile, the Confederacy faced its own struggles. Though rich in spirit, it lacked the industrial base, the population, and the resources of the North. Yet under leaders like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, the Confederate Army fought with brilliance and courage, winning several early victories. But the North had one great advantage: time and industry. It could build more, supply more, and sustain more. Still, the price would be high. By the end of 1862, tens of thousands were dead, and still the war raged. Farms burned, cities crumbled, and the land that once fed a nation now devoured its sons. The conflict had begun as a question of states' rights, but it had become something greater, a battle for the nation's soul. As 1863 approached, Lincoln prepared to take a bold step, one that would redefine the purpose of the war and the destiny of America itself.